Welcome, everyone, to the Pacific Northwest Fundraising Basecamp podcast, where we explore tools and strategies to elevate your nonprofit. I'm your host, Ryan Philbrook, and today we're diving into one of the most essential topics in fundraising, donor database management. Or, as Eddie Allen likes to say, no database, no donor development. Joining me today, we've got Cheri Martin and Eddie Allen. Eddie is the CEO and lead guide at Pacific Northwest Fundraising, and Cheri is the Senior Steward of Fundraising and Community Partnerships. She is an expert in nonprofit data management. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Hey, Ryan.
So, Eddie, we talked about this a little bit last time, just you and I, and we didn't have Cheri with us, which is why we're doing an episode specifically on this.
Yeah.
But data management is the backbone of successful donor development, right?
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned it. I say that all the time. No database, no donor development, right? How do you know who to go ask, right? If you don't have a clearinghouse about that information that you can segment into, donors, volunteers, so on and so forth, and start to create a relationship, to find out if they're a Blazer fan or they like to hike or they're a birder, a birthday, and really start that relationship with that donor or corporate sponsor. Anyways, it's super important. It's an art and a skill set, and that's why we have Cheri here, because she's just our database expert. And it's really one of those things that's really overlooked, okay, especially with the turnover of development directors at about every 16 months. So that's why we're doing a few database projects for our clients right now. There seems to be a real need for this. Again, Cheri's an expert at it, and that's why we have her on today to talk about how to manage a database correctly and make it work for you.
I like that you said it was an art. So, Cheri, that makes you the resident artist at Pacific Northwest Fundraising, right?
Yep.
Maybe? Yeah. Let's start with the basics. Just real quick for anybody who's listening who's maybe just dipping their toes into nonprofits for the first time. What is a donor database?
Well, a donor database is it's kind of like your GPS for donor development. It tells you who your supporters are, provides you insight into their engagement level and their giving history, which is super important, and just kind of gives you a roadmap for building a meaningful relationship with the donors. Without it, you're pretty much navigating blind. So you can open it up, and a well-kept, well-managed database, you're going to open it up and you're going to have a real picture of your donor. First gift, last gift, giving history, average gift, how many times you've called, how many events they've attended, do they volunteer for your organization. All of that kind of information is kept in a database, and super important.
That's really, I was telling Eddie that I forget things a lot. I have to write things down, so that I can reference them later. Is a donor database just like a list of numbers, or why is it so critical for nonprofits to have one?
Well, without it, what I see is a lot of spreadsheets. And spreadsheets are great, but they're impossible to just, keep updated and keep all that information. Then you've got spreadsheets all over the place. So you've got information about one donor over here on this sheet, information over here, and you have no idea how to put that all together or where to go to find all that information in one place. So it's like a clearinghouse. One stop shopping to find out everything about your donor, and to also store it. A lot of times you think, their birthday, I'll remember that. I'll put it on my calendar. Well, that's not going to help if someone else comes and takes your place there and needs to know when that donor's birthday is and make sure that they get a birthday card. Just all of that, do they have pets? Do they like dogs? Yeah. Do they not like dogs? And maybe you won't bring your dog when you go visit them, or maybe you'll ask them to meet at the dog park. So, and one of the things I've learned, I worked at the Humane Society for a while, knowing those pets' names, super important. All that kind of information can be kept within notes, and there's, every database is a little bit different, but you've got a lot of capacity to set it up how you want, so you can, and here's the most important thing, get the information out. It's great to have it in there, but if you can't get it out, it's not really doing you any good either.
think Cheri brings up a really good point, and that oftentimes, I mean, I refer to a database as an engagement platform, right? So it's as you're managing that, just like Cheri said, that relationship and putting that information in, right? So the modern database can take a donation, send a thank you, it drops into the database with that data, segments that data, and again, like Cheri talked about, like, do they like pets? Do they hike? Do they, all those different things. And so it can turn a Facebook like into time, talent, and resources over a time period, right, of engagement. And the only way you can do that is with the database and using that information wisely.
And to expand on that a little bit, it's not just data in there. It's also most of the CRMs that we work with these days are set up to automatically remind you of things.
Yeah.
This donor hasn't given in 6 months, and then they've been a regular donor, so you'll get an alert on your dashboard.
Yeah.
You can you tell it who your donors are, and it will just keep you informed and give you ratings and reminders. It's time to call this person. It'll remind you that it's their birthdays. And then it also has a moves management type. A lot of them have, moving that donor to the next level. Here's where they are. It's time to do this so that you can get them to that next level. It's pretty amazing how sophisticated they've become. And in terms of just really not just storing data, but helping with development.
I like, too, that both of you have made a special point to mention that it's not just the numbers. It's not just that sort of data. And I think when a lot of people think about customer relationship management software, CRMs, they think, oh, when was the last time we emailed? How much did they give? Did we close the sale? Did we not close the sale? But you both have mentioned personal things in there as well, right? Like, are they dog or cat people? When's their birthday? How did we meet these people? Why is this more than just data on a page? Why is this an actual person that I'm looking at right here? And that's what makes them so essential to nonprofits, right?
Well, and think about a new development director coming into an organization and not knowing any of the donors, and someone calls. A good donor development person is going to open that record. I mean, the database is always open, always. It's never closed. And they're going to pull that person's record right away and be able to say, thanks for coming to our gala last month. We really, appreciated having you there. And how's that auction item, whatever, how did you have fun on that trip that you purchased, or have you gone yet? And they can easily establish a relationship right away with that donor. And just think how impressed the donor is to know that they know all that about me, little old me,
Right.
and so it's just super important.
That's interesting. I know that, again, you guys both said just a couple of minutes ago that, like, the reason to have a well-organized and a detailed donor database is so that when an executive director or whoever is in charge of that database leaves, the information doesn't go with them. But, like, I'm envisioning it now. Yeah. I'm envisioning it as, like, a nonprofit that operates without one of these. The executive director is the database.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the equivalent of losing that hard drive, losing all that information, losing a major organ, a part of your organization.
It's a huge problem within the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that turnover at 16 months or under 16 months. And then it's individual knowledge, not organizational knowledge. All right. And so it causes mission interruption, and you're literally starting from zero every time that happens. Okay. The other great thing about it is that, like Cheri mentioned, when a new development director could go in there and reference the gala or things like that. It also, like how the development director doesn't necessarily have to be the lead relationship, right? That could be a relationship as a board member, and that's how we know that donor. So you could reference, hey, Bill Smith asked me to reach out to you, on that, right? It's putting together all these one-to-one relationships, which is what donor development is about. Development literally means over time. So the more data that you can have on that, the more relationship building that you can have, the more successful you will be. So I think it's really important to kind of even double down on that, in the fact that Organizations own this data, right? It's your responsibility to keep that thing clean and updated, to help
Mm-hmm.
build those relationships.
And to be to be a good steward of that data.
It's an excellent word, right? It's really a donor stewardship, which really is part of donor development.
So, Cheri, do you see a lot of it's 2025 now. It hasn't been 2025 for long, but it is 2025. Do you see a lot of nonprofits still operating with, inefficient donor databases or just no database at all?
I would say most of your established nonprofits have some sort of a database because it's pretty much just an understood. I'll never forget one of my positions at going to bat against the board. They just didn't understand why we needed one. I never did get one the entire time I worked there. But the problem that I see more often is, they get the database and then they don't know what to do with it. And they don't manage it properly. And because you talk about a small shop with maybe one ED and one other part-time person who's managing it. And so one of the things that we help them do is find something that will be manageable for the size and the capacity of their organization. That's super important. And setting it up in a way that it isn't, you can't expect to just have one person sitting there all day like a big nonprofit does. Sometimes they have 3 or 4 people assigned just to doing data entry and database management. But a small one, we have to look for something that's manageable for them. But more often than not, what we see is a database that just has not been maintained properly because there's not enough time and capacity.
Yeah, and I would think that is actually a pretty common thing, until you get to be a certain size, because if you grow your organization to a certain size, you've kind of made it through that trial by fire, right?
Right.
But so when you run across nonprofits that have issues with their database management, what are some of the common challenges that you see that nonprofits face regarding that database management?
First, I want to go back just one step. What I have seen successful for some of the really small nonprofits, volunteers, and good volunteers. Volunteers, like maybe 1 or 2 at the most, who you trust, who understand the importance of that database. And I've worked with several myself who would come in 2 or 3 times a week and do the data entry and make sure everything was right, and pretty much had that ownership of it. So I have seen that be successful with small nonprofits. Okay, now moving on.
No, that's good. I mean, volunteers are also an integral part of nonprofits. It's like
excellent point.
The lifeblood.
Yes. I lost track of your next question.
Oh, I was just asking, we were talking about things that you see with nonprofits that have bad database management. Yeah, like what are some common challenges that you see for them?
Duplicate records. Same person in there 3 or 4 times with a donation here and a donation here and a donation there, and maybe 2 different addresses, 3 different emails. Huge. That's huge. That's probably the most common thing that we see. And then missing information, no address, no email address, or maybe a city and a state and a zip, but no street address. So that then you can't communicate with them. If you can't mail them anything, missing email addresses, just, data that's just not been completed, like where do they work? I've seen the city of Vancouver's mayor in the system with no first or last name because it's like they didn't realize that was the mayor.
Oh my gosh.
So, that goes to just really using that Google search and finding out who these people are. And then it's also keeping it updated. Your city officials change every couple of years. Somebody's got to update that. So I would say those are the most common.
So that makes total sense to me that if you're missing, a last name or an address or a phone number, that interrupts that communication, right? And that destroys that relationship that you can be having that's more personal and not just, a mailer that comes.
Right.
What sort of issues do duplicate records produce? Does that result in spamming people, or what does that result in?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
Although a lot of the email systems will recognize that there's, that email's already gone out and stop it from sending 2 or 3. The more sophisticated ones will. But also, okay, so say you're sending your end of year thank you for your total donations for the year. Well, you've got someone in 3 different places. You may not get the right amount for that donor. Maybe their name pulls up as something. It can be as simple as a middle initial. So Eddie A or Lee A. What would it be?
It's
Lee E. Allen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of Eddie Allen. Now,
or Eddie, right? So that's a
that
thing
out.
that's actually happened to me, right? So like my legal name is Lee Edward Allen or Lee E. Allen, but I go by Eddie Allen, and I've got receipts for both from the
And
same
invitations for both guys.
Oh
and
man.
invitations. Yeah.
Mhm.
So instead of merging that into one or goes by Eddie kind of thing. Yeah, no, that happens quite frequently.
But I would say, Ryan, the biggest deal would be that this, going right back to what we talked about at the beginning, that donor calls. You have their information in 3 different places. You pull up the wrong one and you don't know everything. And
Yeah.
you say, thank you for your gift 2 years ago. And they're like, well, that's funny because I just sent you $5,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you
Yeah.
go. You've made a big snafu.
Yeah. And that's just an egg on your face moment. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. You were throwing around bigger words earlier too that I'm really curious about. Like, how does like segmentation and reporting play into this? Or like, more higher functioning business stuff that way?
Well, so in major donor, cultivate, identifying your potential major donors, taking a $100 a year donor, maybe to the $1,000 level. You have to be able to pull those reports and see who gave this amount, what the thresholds, how often they're giving, when the last time they gave a gift. And that's what your database will do for you. You can tell all those things you want to know. And then you can sort it out, can do averages, find out what's our average gift and who's above that. How many gifts do people normally give in 1 year? Who gives more than that? And so then that's how you can start, saying, oh, these are our, and who gives at the top 10% of all of those different categories.
Right.
I've also run reports where you figure out how many years of giving. That's important. How many years, like if someone's been a 10-year consistent donor, super important to know. And you can do that with the way you pull it out. But number 1 is how you put it in. If you don't put it in right, you don't get it out right.
That's right.
So
That's funny. It reminds me a lot of when you've got a group of friends, right? And they're the ones that you don't see quite as often as like the main friends. And then they show up and you're like, oh, dude, how's your wife? And I don't have one. And you're like, right. Okay. I must be thinking of a different Lee.
That's it.
exactly.
Yeah. And it affects that relationship. It hurts that
It
trust
does.
between the organization and the donors.
Yep.
So what does it look like when, like from a business standpoint, what does it look like when a nonprofit is operating without a good organized donor database system?
They don't really know what they're doing. They don't have a map of, who are our donors, where are we going to get them to, what's another thing is seeing what worked. If you track your appeals,
Right.
This is a huge mistake I see a lot. Not tracking who attended, who received the invitation to an event or who received the appeal and then who responded. So then did that appeal, did only 5% of the people respond to that appeal? Then there was something wrong with that appeal. The next one, maybe 50% respond. So that helps your marketing department.
Yeah. Cheri's really, really good at that, right? Like creating the specific donation link for that appeal, right? So if it's an end of year appeal campaign, there's actually a donation link for, so like she said, like you're tracking that marketing. So that came in off of your end of year appeal and goes into, now it's all going into your general fund, but you can track it to that actual marketing campaign, which is really neat to know, right? So yeah, what worked, what didn't work? You're kind of running A/B testing all the time that way with your campaigns.
Well, and pretty much all of the databases these days have the online giving as part of their component.
Yeah.
And so what Eddie's saying is what we're doing is we're setting up campaigns, we're setting up appeals inside the database. Then when we go online, make the form, we tie it. And so it tells it, and then it feeds it right back into the database. So the info, like when you make a donation online, it goes right into the organization's database, and it tells it what, and maybe you responded to an email, maybe you clicked the link on that email, it knows that.
Yeah.
It knows if you did it from the website or if you did it from a QR code. So now we're talking about not only helping your development people, but helping your marketing people understand what's working and what's not working.
See, now you're speaking my language. I am horrible at knowing how to gather that information, but I love analyzing that sort of data. Like data is invaluable at all different stages of an organization's life cycle.
I think it's become even more important. It's a both and by 3 out of 4 major gifts now start with a gift of under $250. So you talked about that donor stewardship and having that data then to take that donor from that to a major gift, right? And so it used to be that Facebook likes aren't a donor strategy, but it's an engagement strategy. And when you can tie that into a campaign, then you can really see what the outcome is of that campaign around the end of your giving or Give More 24 specifically, right? And that's where it kind of gets really exciting. And then what you do with that, right? There's this entry point into your organization. Cheri mentioned earlier about having all that data, especially around addresses, if you want to do a capacity report and find out, just because somebody gave you $50, maybe they could give you 50,000, right? And so it becomes really important, this data and how you manage it.
Another part of tracking those donations is if you see that people, a lot of times you have restricted funds, like maybe if you are at the Humane Society, it's for veterinary care. So then those are the donors who like to give to veterinary care. So when something specific comes up that you need to purchase, you know who to call because they have a passion for that area, whatever it is. And if you can't track that information and have it readily reportable, like who all has given to this fund, and then and you can see how much they've given, when they gave it. If they leave notes, the notes are in there with the gift. So
that is a really good high-level actionable tip for anybody listening. Like when you're writing down data and you're logging this sort of stuff, what areas do the specific donors like to give to? That is incredible information to hold on to and to have. So, okay. So just to recap real quick what we've talked about, donor databases are super important. They're not just numbers. They are a record of the different relationships that you have with all of your different donors, all of your different audience members, the people that you can talk to. Without a good, organized, up-to-date database, you are potentially spamming people. You're potentially getting their names or addresses wrong. You look like you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to market because you don't know what works. And your asks and your campaigns are largely going to be a lot less successful than they could be. So that's the bad stuff. But now that we've taken a look at the problems, what are some of the best practices, Cheri, that nonprofits can implement today after listening to this episode?
Well, okay, if you're going for the duplicates, what I see is that people just really don't look. They put that what they think is a new donor's name in, and maybe don't really hit that search and say, is that person in here first? And that's how a lot of times you get those duplicates. So, really, before you put the information in, understanding your database and how it works, how it searches for duplicates, because they're all different. Some of them only will search on emails. And if the email's not a duplicate, well, how many of us have different emails? So you could be in there 3 different times because maybe one time you responded with this one. And so it's training your staff on how to put that information in so that you don't have all those problems on the other side. A lot of it is not anyone's fault. If you do an online gift and you change your name in any way at all, like with Eddie, if he donates one day as Lee and the next time he donates as Eddie, That's why he's going to have 2 in there. If I put my middle initial in one time, then I've got 2 different records, because the database it can't tell those. A good one will pop it up and go, could this be a duplicate? And a lot of them do. The really good ones do that. Even on part of an email, they'll say, hey, this person's email is kind of the same. So learning that. And that's the first step to avoiding your dupes. How does your database recognize them, and what can you do to make sure there's as few as possible? And then don't be lazy. When you put your information in, someone doesn't have an address, Google it or ask. Pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, we'd like to have all of your, or send them an email and say, thank you, we'd like to get all your information. Too often I see people just take the easy way out, just put the name in and say, well, that's good enough. We've got their name and email. We're fine.
Yeah.
What about you, Eddie? Other things?
No, I think just having that complete record. I mean, oftentimes it's really easy to just default to name and email address. But, you know, if you get the physical address, phone number, you know, as much completed information on that donor, on that record, the better that data is going to be.
And then also getting your staff to understand the importance. To me, that's hard. If you've got people who haven't been in development for very long, they don't see it, and how important it is to PDF a copy of that note that the person sent with the check, so that it's there, so that when I look at the gift, I don't have to go look in their file or try to find it some other place, or not even know it existed. So it's that thoroughness, and making sure everyone in your organization understands how important it is to put that information in completely and accurately.
And organization, when Cheri said staff, I mean, organization, again, going back to that organization owns that data, that boards understand the importance of this information. And because it goes hand in hand with donor development, right? Hey, we need development, yet we don't have any information about our donors, okay? Or it's all in someone's head. And so it just goes hand in hand. No database, no donor development, garbage in, garbage out. So, you know, you really have to put an emphasis towards this.
Or boards wanting you to market things more heavily, but not having any idea what's working, because you're not tracking where your donations are coming from.
Yeah.
You know, what's working.
Yeah.
So
you're making it sound so simple. Like when you say, because I mean, what I'm hearing is, like, once you get it set up, right, and you've got your donor database, best practices that people can start implementing right now, right, are good communication between your team and the administration and the donors, right? Good communication, and just having good standard operating procedures, good SOPs of, like, you know, go through, make sure there aren't duplicates, go through, make sure everything's up to date and that data is segmented properly. Make sure your staff is trained up on how to use the software, right?
and only let people have certain roles. You know, not everybody needs to have full access to the database. Some just need to be able to see it, but not get in there and mess with it. And so you can set up user levels, you know, full access or view only. And, you know, then you have to understand your staff and what they need and how much access you want them to have.
So you're also segmenting that part of things.
What's that?
I was saying, so you're also segmenting that part of things on the employee level too.
Yeah, you would be amazed at the different levels of access you can provide people.
Yeah.
Or deny them.
That's cool. Yeah, because you were mentioning, like, the really good ones allow you to do different things. What is an example of a good user-friendly donor management software?
Good and user-friendly.
Not necessarily mutually exclusive, I hope.
Well, you know, I've worked with everything from Zephy, which is completely free, to Razor's Edge, which can run, you know, $30,000-$40,000 a year. So the hard part for me is I've seen the Cadillac. I know what all can be done, but I also know how hard it is. It's not user-friendly in any way. We recommend DonorDoc a lot. It's a less expensive one. And it really does it has the email component, so you don't have to have another separate system like MailChimp. You can email right through it. and it tracks. So then you see, Ryan got this email, and you can even open up the email to remember what that email looked like. Did Ryan open it? Oh, he did open it. Did he click? Yep, he clicked.
Right.
He clicked
Yeah.
3 times on that email. Did he make a donation? No, he didn't.
Come on, Ryan.
So they'll
Yeah.
have that. They'll have the online donation
Links with
forms where you
Canva.
can make the form in the system and then put it on your website, a link to your website. And some of them don't have that. So understanding what they need, I think, you know,
Right.
sitting
Yeah.
down with it and what they really, really will be able to do. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, we want all of this. We want all the bells and whistles. Well, how are you going to manage that? And are you really going to be able to, you know, utilize it? So we like to start kind of small, you know, with the less
Mhm.
lower priced ones that we're familiar with, that we know will give everything they need. And then as organizations grow, they do have to go up to the bigger ones that allow more
I was just going to mention
customization,
that.
so you
Like,
can put
if
in
you would
your
have
own
asked me 5
fields
or
and things like
6 years
that.
ago,
But it's pretty,
I
I'm
wasn't a
just
big fan
amazed,
of
Eddie,
the
at how much they've
all-encompassing
changed over the last, I'd
donor
say,
relation
5
management
years.
systems, right? I felt like, well, maybe it did the CRM part well, but it didn't do the email real well, right? So you still needed to link to MailChimp or Constant Contact, and that's all changed. And that's all changed, right? Like the Donor Doc and some others out there really do all aspects of that really, really well, right? And it's nice to have that all in-house, right? Like Cheri's talking about that tracking or creating your email right from that platform, and it connects to Canva now and stuff. So just it makes this all really powerful, encompassing engagement platform in a lot of ways, right? You're doing marketing from it and donor development, and you have it right there. The smart logic tells you, hey, Ryan just made a donation and he gave us $500 and he normally gives us 50, you know, and so all these different smart logic things have come along. You're starting to see AI in them as well, right? So again, that change has completely flipped me on it before, where I'm like, well, it does one thing well, but it doesn't do the other two. And now there's some really great platforms out there that does all 3 of those aspects really, really well.
You know, before this previous question, I said to you guys that you made it sound so easy. All of a sudden, it sounds extremely complicated and like there's a lot to learn. but I mean, I'm also assuming that that's where an organization like Pacific Northwest Fundraising would come in, right? Like if I'm just going out and I go, hey, I need a donor database platform. Oh, holy crap. There are 5,000 to choose from. How do
Yeah.
I know it's going to work for me? What does it look like when an organization comes to Pacific Northwest Fundraising? Like how do they get help?
Well, the first thing we do is we see what they already have and what they're using. So sometimes they'll send us their 10 different spreadsheets so that we can figure out how they're keeping track. A lot of times people, their idea of a CRM is their QuickBooks, which, you know, works to a point, but it's not a donor relation tool at all. But it's a good starting point if they don't have anything to be able to pull the information out. And I've done that several times. Finding out from them how they're going to use it, how they can, you know, their capacity to use it, who's going to be in charge of it, and what all they need. Do they, for some reason, we have a lot of resistance to people moving from MailChimp to the internal email system within the, and to me, that's huge. And most of them, I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
They're just almost exactly like MailChimp, really.
Wow.
So getting them, you know, so it's just getting in, learning, and also making sure they're aware of all the options. Because most of them don't even know, you know, they hear like, oh, I've heard of a little green light, how's that? And then providing those, you know, setting up the demos so that they can meet with the sales rep, they can talk, they can kind of go through it all. But still in the background giving them, because, you know, we've used them, we know. Yeah, there's a salesperson and then there's a person who's really used it. So helping them kind of take that information and decipher it and let them know how it's going to work for them. And then budget is huge. I mean,
really
you can, you know, how much money do you have to invest in this? And who do you have to keep it going? and make sure it's maintained properly. Because most executive directors, if they're the development director too, that's the last thing in the world. And that's not where how their mind works. They're not a data geek. They just want they want someone to tell them all that. So learning that and then trying to figure out what's going to work best for them and then help kind of leading them to that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So we just steward them through that process, right? Just meet them where they're at, kind of provide a good, better, best option based on their budget and needs. And then once they select something, be able to set it up for them.
I like that word. You said shepherd them through that, right?
Yeah, steward them through the process,
Steward,
right?
okay.
So,
I blame the Zoom glitching. But
no worries.
I think that's a good way to describe it, because Cheri, like, it sounds like what you guys are saying is a nonprofit comes to Pacific Northwest Fundraising, and a lot of times the database could be a mess. Pacific Northwest Fundraising helps them take stock of what they've got, helps them organize what's already there, helps them identify areas that need to be improved, and then Cheri, you like walk them through, hey, here are the different options. Here's what I think would work for you. Like Eddie said, here are several different packages. Like, which one are you thinking? Let's get you meeting with people. And you can kind of help them gain an understanding of where they are, where they want to be, and then what the path looks like to get there. Is that correct?
Because
Absolutely.
it is a path.
Yeah.
It's not, you've got to get the information out and into a format that then you can import in. And it's a lot of, testing to make sure it went in correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it did, deleting it and starting over.
Yeah. It takes time to set it up properly too, right? Just because
make sure that you know what they need. Like, do they have, different groups that they want to be able to identify as they go in? If it's an alum, if you're working with a school, are they an alum? Are they a parent? So those kinds of, all those different segmentations, because when you send emails, you're targeting parents, you're talking alumni, you're targeting students, maybe vendors, sponsors. So all of those kinds of tags have to go on there.
And that speaks a lot too to what you were just saying about there's the salesperson and then there's the person who's actually used the software. Right? When they talk to you versus a salesperson, you're kind of helping them understand what questions they should be asking, what information there should, because you're saying these things to me. There have been several times just in the span of this conversation where I'm like, wow, I never thought about doing that, or asking that question or creating that piece of data to put in. And it's so simple once you know to do it. And I think a lot of people just don't have that experience until they get that experience.
Yeah.
Until it happens and they see the rewards of knowing when Mrs. Baker calls and you had the warmest, nicest personal conversation because you had all that information at your fingertip. Until that happens for them, I think it's really hard to get people to understand how important it is to get that information in there.
Yeah.
But boy, when it happens, it's like magic.
Yeah.
Just before we get going, because I just looked at the clock and I don't know how an hour melted away, but do you guys have some examples that you could share of this sort of a situation?
I do. Working at a university, just called an alum. We had outstanding alums, and we were trying to get back in touch with them. And this was a very the 1940s, right? And get this nice little old woman from the Midwest on the phone, and we talked for probably half an hour. And she mentioned that she was until COVID had been involved working in a food bank. And that she did it every day. She loved it. She was a volunteer, and she just talked about her passion for this food bank. Well, ironically enough, the school was going to be starting one for the students, and so I gave her a call back, and I said, you know what? We're opening a food bank, and I'm so excited, and I just thought you would want to know, and I'll send you some pictures of it. Well, she made quite a donation, so it's that
Wow.
Putting that information in there and. So say it'd been 6 months and I'd forgotten. If you put the information in right and you have those code words, you would be able to pull that out and say, here was a phone call where they mentioned food bank. Yeah. So, maybe I wouldn't be able to remember her name, but if I'd put it in the database correctly, then it's there. And then the the item comes up and you know who to call. And I didn't ask her for any money. I didn't ask her for a penny.
That is so
I
cool.
provided her an opportunity.
Ooh, I
That's
like
how
that.
I always say it. I'm giving you an opportunity.
That's right. I have a similar. I was at a volunteer event when I was at the Gardner School, and guy was wearing a blazer hat, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, are you a fan? You know, you Blazer fan?" And he's like, "Yeah, huge fan." And I'm like, "Well, like a really big fan, like a John Hollinger fan who was a geek, wrote a column, did this thing around PER and that kind of thing, right? In the early analytics days." And he goes, "I read his column this morning." So, so we started this conversation, put it in his record in the database, sent him my like picks for that upcoming NBA season a couple of different times, and went back and forth and said, "Oh, the Blazers are going to be, 50-32 or something," and back and forth, and just had this conversation and relationship around that. And a little bit later, he just asked me what the school needed, and that led to a major gift.
It's all about relationships.
And that's the difference too. Because it's a big button issue right now, right? Like data collection, big companies spying on your email, big corporations just logging everything about you. But what we're talking about here is totally different. It's not information that you're gathering on people just so that you can market and get all their money and everything. It is exactly what you guys have been talking about, which is developing relationships, because nonprofits are a service to the community. And if you don't have a relationship with your community, then what are you even doing?
And people really, although they give to an organization, it's really because of a relationship they've established within that organization.
Yeah, that's why I give to the ones I give to.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, you guys. Like this has been a really interesting chat, and again, I cannot believe how fast it went. My gosh. To everybody listening at home, that is it for our episode. But remember what Eddie always says. Eddie, what is it you always say?
No database, no donor development.
No database, no donor development. We should sell t-shirts. But with the right tools and the right practices, you can unlock the full potential of your donor relationships and take your fundraising to the next level. Thank you, Cheri and Eddie, for coming by today. And if you listeners are ready to clean up your database, boost your donor engagement, all that good stuff, contact Pacific Northwest Fundraising today. This is the Basecamp Podcast. I'm Ryan Philbrook. Catch you guys next time.